Hello and welcome to the West Ham Breakdown with me, Jack Alderton, and my mate Callum Goodall. And this week I think it might be a West Ham breakdown because I'm feeling pretty miserable after a 3-2 defeat to Chelsea, where we played really well, did a lot of things right, had very good control of the match for 50 minutes, and somehow managed to lose it. We'll talk about exactly how we did that. We'll talk about the emotional effects of that, how we react, and how we cope with a situation like this. We'll talk about the Todibo red card and the effects of that, other refereeing decisions we didn't like, tactical things that went well in the first half, tactical things that went badly wrong in the second half. Break down the different decisions we made in terms of the substitutions and things we might have been able to do better. We'll also talk about Axel Disasi. That, however, will be on extra time, where we'll also be talking about individual performances. So there's a lot to get through. And if you want to get all of it, patreon.com/analyticsunited for the full show. The first half will be the big headlines and the tactics chat between Cal and I. The second half will be Disasi and individual performances. And then, of course, also on Patreon, you've got the preview, PMP, FPL, FM, Q&A,
all the acronyms,
live streams. You've got loads and loads of additional shows that we do over there. So it'd be nice to see a few of you over there joining in the next couple of weeks. Lots of people have stuck around from the trials that we did post Spurs, which is a good indication that I think the content on there is quite good, and you may enjoy it. But Cal, are you okay?
Great question. Yeah, it was difficult, wasn't it? It was very difficult. I watched it out in the pub with a few friends who I've watched West Ham games with previously, and they don't often see me as jubilant as I was at half-time, bordering on ecstatic. I wasn't silly enough to think that the result was in the bag, but it was more the performance. Like, the way that we were playing in that first half, just... yeah, fantastic. Like, such a marked improvement. Seeing us do things and play with swagger away at Stamford Bridge, like, felt great. Felt really good. Obviously, the second half comes. We start all right in the second half, and then changes happen, both our changes and their changes, which we'll come on to, that massively influenced the game. And yeah, it was one of those games where as soon as one went in, the fear that lives within all West Ham fans creeps in, and if it happens to us, it happens to the players, I guess, to some extent, given what they've been through this season. And then the second goes in, and you're like, we've been here before. And the third one kind of felt inevitable, sadly. But yeah, I think the important thing today is to give as much time to the positives in the first half as it is to try and, yeah, it would be easy for us as a podcast to just slam in and go crazy negative on everything that's happening at the minute, but there really are some positives to pull out, so I think we'll definitely try and do that today. But yeah, I'm just going to try
struggling. He's struggling. He's struggling already. We're a couple of minutes in and he's already struggling.
I'm just replaying the back heel to back heel 1-2 between Bowen and Summer. Yeah. That was it. That was the moment.
Keep doing that. Look, I think a couple of things we need to say straight away. It's really disappointing to lose the game in the way that we lose the game. We shouldn't lose the game in the way that we lose the game. The goals that we concede are not good enough. The way that we defend our box is not good enough. These are issues we've seen before, and we can't afford for them to continue to crop up in this way. We can't afford for them to cost us our Premier League status, which they absolutely will, if we continue to make errors like this and defend in the way that we do in some of those scenarios in the second half. Equally, if we play the way that we did in the first half against most teams in the Premier League, we'll win games because we were very good. In the first half, admittedly, Chelsea were very poor, but you have to be very good to affect that against Chelsea, against a team as good as Chelsea. A different case if we were talking about a team that's right down at the bottom, maybe, and we'd had that sort of performance. But Chelsea are a good side, and it's not an easy thing to go away to Chelsea and perform the way that we did for the first 50 minutes of the match. I thought we were very dominant. I thought we had real control of the game without the ball, for sure, but we didn't need it to be effective. And I felt like every time we got it, we were a real threat. We were very dangerous. And I think they were very limited in terms of what they were able to create. They started sort of well. I think maybe the first 5-10 minutes of the game until we score. They do some things well. They get some dangerous balls into the box. There are a couple of big back post headers from Wan-Bissaka. In fact, throughout the first half, there's some big back post headers from both fullbacks. But that, in a way, that's an indication of all that they were able to create. It was just crosses into the box. Didn't really feel too threatened by that much else that they did in the first 50 minutes of the game. And then also credit to us for the way that we reacted 2-2. The second goal goes in and it would have been very easy to completely crumble there. Of course, we then do crumble after the third goal, and the Palmer chance that we give up is a mess that could have made it 4-2. But we reacted so positively at 2-2. I thought we restabilised well. I thought we found a way to carry a threat ourselves. And if Todibo scores, well, what is a massive chance, I think you'd be hard pressed to say that West Ham wouldn't have deserved to win it if that had gone in. The XG at the end of the game looks like Chelsea have gone and dominated it in truth once they've turned it on in the second half. But you've got some massive XG accumulated in one chance, which is the lap off the bar, where him and Kilman head it at the same time, and then Cucurella following in, and then the Palmer chance is, I don't know, it's like 0.5 for that chance as well. And the game's gone at that point, which is not to just write off stuff that Chelsea do create and do well in the game. But when you've got that on one side for Chelsea, and then for us, you've got two, maybe even three, what I would describe as massive opportunities that are non-shot chances, cutbacks that haven't led to shots, where Chalobah's wedged one off the line as Pablo's following in at the back post to score. Souček has bisected Bowen and Somerville with both running into space in the box. It's a fine cutback. I have no issue with the cutback. It's just, I think we're very unlucky that it doesn't fall for one of our players. And then you've got other opportunities in there as well. Wan-Bissaka late in the first half running through. I think maybe he could push and shoot rather than trying the cutback to Bowen. But big openings that didn't lead to shots. So balancing those things, I think, makes you feel as though at the end of the game you look at the stats and think, have I just lied to myself? No, the reality is I think West Ham did have really good control of the game and threatened really well, and losing it 3-2 is an incredibly harsh outcome from the quality of the performance. The biggest question that we have to look at and take forward from this is how do we mentally recover? How do you mentally recover from a situation like this? We know we faced it before this season, but perhaps not in such stark, harsh and painful fashion as this was, because this was better than other performances against a bigger, more difficult team away from home, off the back of a couple of really good performances, off the back of some wins, off the back of some building momentum. It's probably the hardest one to climb back from now.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly difficult for all the reasons that you've said. My hope is that reframing it, if I was the manager, this is how I would be approaching it today, is that and I think it's important as well in the context of what the squad's probably been lacking as well this season, but you kind of see it at the end, right? It's like we play very well for 50 minutes, fine, it gets away from us the gulf in quality essentially in terms of who they bring on and who we bring on, and the gulf widening as the game goes on and those changes are made. I think it's not unreasonable to think that sort of thing could happen when the gulf's that wide. And then I think you see how frustrated the players are by the fact that it's happened at the end, and that's why we lash out and it all balls over in a game that I felt for large parts of it kind of lacked that bite, given what we know about the relationship between West Ham and Chelsea and how spicy some of those games have been in the past. It didn't feel like a derby match until literally the last moments of the game, and I think that does come from frustration. And I think there hasn't been that necessarily strength of character or strength of response previously, whether you think it's a good thing or not. But I think as disappointing as it is, and as particularly in the context, if you're the manager, I think you need to try and harness that the best you can, which is a weird way to look at it, but all those players should now have a chip on their shoulder. And I think a chip on your shoulder in the situation that we're in can be as much a positive factor as it can be a negative if you leverage it in the right way. And I think with someone like Nuno, from everything I've heard, from what we've seen in press conferences and from what you hear being reported from the players, the introduction of Paco Gémez and what everyone's making of his arrival and sort of the energy and passion that he brings, I don't think that having a chip on our shoulder is necessarily a bad thing with those guys behind, if they can be the motivating force and say, look, what happened at the weekend? Yeah, sure, disappointing. Let's focus on the positive. Let's focus on that first 50 minutes. Let's focus on the fact that Chelsea are one of the best sides in the league. Really, they're not obviously title contenders, but they're certainly miles ahead of where we are at the minute. And we went toe for toe. If anything, we won the battle for 50 minutes. And as you say, we're unfortunate. But I think the key is, and this is the job of I've nearly ventured into Rosenia territory there and start talking about aging men, but that is it, right? It's tactics is one thing, but it's your man management is the other. And I think the key now is to not let the players come away feeling disheartened and feel like this is a foregone conclusion, but instead say, if we play, as you said, Jack, if we play the way that we did in that first 50 minutes against Chelsea, against worse teams, we will pick up points along the road. We just have to do what we can do. Everything else is out of our control. If the chips fall, great. But the chips are never going to fall if you don't put that level of performance and that level of commitment in. So I think, marrying that sort of bite that we saw in the last 90 minutes. Sure, Todibo's not going to be on the pitch for at least 3 games and potentially longer, depending on if it gets reviewed. But Adama looked up for the fight. For sure, he looked up for the fight and gave me one of the highlights of the season when he absolutely rags Cucurella off the pitch. So a bit more of that energy. And yeah, maybe that's the way to look at it. But it is obviously difficult to not see it from a disappointing lens. But I just don't think you can... You can't afford to look at it like that. We don't have time to sulk and stuff. We need to come back and say, nah, we can do that for longer. But yeah. Obviously, it does feel difficult as a fan as well to say that. I'm trying to put my objective lens on.
You're tying yourself in knots every time you get to the end, but just drifting back down the path of, I can't believe we've lost this and I feel miserable and I'm sad again. One of the ways in which you could turn this, in terms of the narrative internally, is to kind of do the almost Jose Mourinho type thing of everyone's against us. Because it does feel a little bit like that. We've had
100%.
Lots of situations now, lots of games where we've competed well enough, done a lot of things right, and just haven't got the reward that it feels like we've deserved from the game. Of course, there are things within our control that we have to do better, and we speak about that with the way we concede the goals and the way we defend our box, and we know this has been an issue for us all season. That doesn't change. We have to keep our composure better. We have to defend our box better. We have to convert our own chances better as well. We create enough. We have to be more clinical in the way that we convert those moments into goals. Still, I think there are enough situations this season where a bit more luck would have been nice, where it hasn't fallen for us, where things haven't dropped for us, where gilt-edged chances have hit a post or a keeper's made an unbelievable save. And it would also be nice to get the rubber of the green with a few refereeing decisions as well, because this was a game where I don't think the referee was particularly bad, but you've got the Somerville backwards tackle on the edge of our box, which I think was a perfectly good tackle that gets given as a foul. Obviously, Palmer does nothing with the free kick, but still, it's a part of the game that develops generates a moment for them, changes the momentum a little bit when we're in control and when we're carrying a threat on the break and we're dominating the duels. It interrupts that for us. You've got the moment with Bowen and Fernandes in the box as well towards the end of the first half, where Bowen gets in front of him as he takes a loose touch, and Fernandes is, this Enzo Fernandes, absolutely, he's all over him. I know he wins the ball in the end, but for that not to even go to VAR when he's got his arms all the way around him to be able to get himself into a position that he can make a tackle, again feels a little bit kind of like, okay, sure. If that's the other way, I think, and crucially, they make a meal of it, which they would do, which anyone does in the Premier. We don't seem to do in these situations. I think we probably sit on a VAR review for a while, even if it isn't given, which again changes the feel a little bit, changes the momentum a little bit. When you have those moments, it increases the anxiety for the team that's defending. You've got Wesley Fofana against Castellanos, who Castellanos gets in behind him on the end of a long ball, and Fofana hauls him down. That seemed like a strange decision to not sit on for longer for a yellow card to be given there. The Todibo red card is a red card. I have no issue with that at all. But after all of that, the decision that I do have the biggest issue with is the one that mirrors the Brighton equaliser, where Mavro went up for his header and Costellas kicked him in the head. And we didn't even pause and look at it on VAR. And then you've obviously got the Ritter handball. I think at the time I felt that I was more infuriated by what I felt was a handball by Ritter. But the more times I've looked at those moments back, I actually think that Mavro should just make a meal of being kicked in the head, and then it's definitely given as a free kick. Here, Mavro should just make a meal. He shouldn't have to, right? But he should just make a meal of Delap swinging his arms around in the box before the ball comes in. He's not even contesting. We look at the Delap on Kilman moment where Delap maybe pushes him into the goal. For me, that's not a foul. Before it, as Mavro's trying to get across him, when he just swings an arm and elbows him in the head, that is a foul. That is always a foul. And that should be given as a foul. You can't use your arms like that when you're not contesting for a ball in the box just to get advantage in terms of the positions in the box. We end up defending one centre-back less, and it directly leads to them being able to score the rebound. So I think when you look at some quite frustrating refereeing decisions, small and big, across the match and in other games that have felt like this, maybe it would be a good moment to turn it into that sort of feeling inside the camp where you generate that sort of backs against the wall, everyone's against us sort of sensation. And you have to work that little bit harder. You have to push that little bit further. And you have that extra togetherness that comes from that to fight for those points. Because certainly in this game, enough of it was there for us to have gotten something. And sometimes in these situations, players, even though they know they can do things better, can do with that sort of feeling of, okay, we did enough and it was taken away from us, and if we just do that again, we'll be all right in other games. And it might stop you from having the heads drop reaction, which I think is going to be difficult to stop after the outcomes we get in this game. We're going to go on to talk about tactics. There's going to be a lot of it because there's a big difference between the first half and the second half. A lot of people have talked about the Kilman substitution and going to a back five, and was that the right decision? What was the effect? And do we end up defending too deep in the second half? We know we concede lots more goals in second halves than we do in first halves. So we'll talk about all of that next. But like I say, if you want to grab Disassi chat, because we have done the Disassi research, then that will be over on extra time.
All right, quick break from all things West Ham, because we have got a gift for you. Free beer. That's right, our friends at Beer 52 are back, and they're offering you a free case of 8 outstanding beers for just $5.95 postage. For those who don't know, Beer 52 is the UK's #1 beer club. Every month they curate a case of limited edition beers from the world's best independent breweries, one of which I have here, a hazy New England IPA from the Basqueland Brewery, which we're going to try now. And I can confirm it tastes just as good as the can looks. You'll also get their award-winning Ferment magazine, along with a selection of tasty snacks. And if dark beers aren't your thing, don't worry. You can just choose the light case. And even if, after all that, you are not a fan, simply pause or cancel at any time. So, to fill the fridge, just head to beer52.com/analytics. That's beer52.com/analytics. Cheers.
So you referenced it earlier on. The difference in the first half and the second half was big for many reasons, but one of the most obvious ones was they brought quite a lot of very good players off the bench, right?
Yeah. I mean, even before the first half as well, like to go all the way back, obviously Jamie Bino-Gittins starts, and I think he's a good player. I think Pedro Neto probably scares me a bit more, quite a bit more, in fact. I don't think Gittins has had the impact that many Chelsea fans would have hoped, and not had the impact that, well, I don't know, maybe the Chelsea board would have hoped, but as we see, they're more of a trading body at this point, so who knows, maybe it's an asset thing. But yeah, he was the one player that I didn't necessarily feel that much of a fear factor for, and then when he went down, I was like, Okay, brilliant. Pedro Neto's coming on now. That changes things. Then, obviously, in the second half, um, Rosenior does the right thing, I think, given the position they're in, and decides to make wholesale changes the right players, and I think pound for pound, every player that comes on is probably a better player than the player they replaced, in my opinion. Certainly in terms of their position to impact this game. Obviously, João Pedro is João Pedro. I think we know that. Fofana, for what he offered, better than Badiashile, and I think just generally a better player. Obviously, also a player that cost them £80 million. So it's when you put the price tags on,
More
that's
aggressive
even.
with the ball as well, right? Like Badiashile,
Yeah,
you have moments in the first half. What's that moment where he kind of like kind of wedges a bouncing pass back to the goalkeeper when he's put under a tiny bit of pressure, and it
yeah,
forces them to go long. We win a throw, we get some momentum off that situation. Fofana, there's none of that. There's much more aggressive, incisive, good work with the ball, and obviously he has a big impact for their first goal, where he carries to the edge of our box and
yeah.
whips a fantastic crossing.
Yeah, and then I think the most impactful for me, and obviously he also gets, in fact, all three of those, bar Neto, I think, have something to do with a goal, don't they? Pedro gets an assist and a goal, Fofana gets an assist, and then Cucurella scores. But yeah, Cucurella, I think, for me, just, in terms of the quality difference between him and Hato, I think Hato's a good player. I think Cucurella is probably on form, one of the best left-backs in the world at the minute, which is a crazy thing to say. But also just the versatility that he can offer. He's one of those players that a very modern fullback in the sense that he can play as a sort of standard fullback that can hit on the overlap. He can play as a fullback that drifts inside and becomes a 6/8. He can also become a 10 and a box crasher in that respect. So we see him kind of do all of those things at various different points in the game, which is so problematic for us because Rosenior is he's a lot of things, but I think he's a good tactician. I think that is fair to say. He makes tweaks. The tweaks prove to be correct, and having someone like Cucurella on the pitch who allows you to make those tweaks without necessarily having to change that many more personnel in the context of this game is doubly important, because at that point they've made 4 subs, so if he needs to change personnel he's only got one more shot at it. So having someone like Cucurella who you can just be like, oh mate, can you do this now? Instead we're going to change that, and every time delivers. Just such a problem for us, because whilst they can do that on the fly, our ability to respond to those changes on the fly is hampered by the fact that we don't have the same quality of player to bring on to match those changes, but also the position that we're in as a squad from a tactical and confidence point of view, we can't match the level of adaptation. We don't respond as well, and it becomes increasingly difficult for us throughout the game to adapt to those changes as and when they come. And we've seen it time and time again. We get pinned back and pinned back and pinned back, and all the good stuff that happens in the first half becomes even more difficult for us to do. The outball's not there as much. We can't transition as much, and we end up in a situation which we see time and time again where we have to be even more dependent on our ability to defend our box, which has been a weakness throughout the season. So it just becomes untenable, really. You kind of feel like I think that's where that sense of inevitability comes from, isn't it? It's like we know what happens in this scenario, so the longer we spend in this scenario, the more likely something bad is to happen, and that's what plays out.
Yeah, the bench on quality for us, even forgetting what they do, kind of kills us on its own as well, right? I don't think it's I don't say this is a big criticism really of any of the players that come on, but our squad is just not deep enough to in terms of the quality. We have a good, clearly the way we play the first half, the first 15 minutes, we have a good first 11.
Yep.
There's a question mark maybe over how fit we are in order to be able to maintain that for 90 minutes. And when that's the case, you have to use the bench. And when the bench can't maintain the level that that you'll get from the first 50, 60 minutes out of your first choice players, you're in a really dire situation, because you don't just lose out in terms of what you were able to achieve with some of the players that come off the pitch. You also just slowly lose out with the players that have started, because the fitness there is I would have to say, quite obviously on numerous occasions in these games this season, not good enough to go 90 minutes at the kind of intensity that's required. We slow up quite badly in games, and when you can't fix that from the bench, it's a massive issue, especially with guys like, I mean, Again, not as a massive individual criticism of him because he's done a lot of very good things for us this season, but with Callum Wilson, good operator in the box for us when we need a goal, but the loss of energy out of possession is just so significant it has a cataclysmic effect on the way that it feels for us out of possession and with the ball, to be honest, in transition as well, and that's really difficult for our players. The front two that we've brought in that are playing and starting games at the moment are giving incredible energy, incredible work rate, and they can't do it for 90, and we're in a massive hole every time now. These guys have to come off because we just have no ability to replace that kind of energy in the team, and it makes life very difficult for us. That's the bench stuff. It's part of it. What we can control, because we haven't decided to go and invest in a bunch of guys that we can bring off the bench. Whatever you think about that is whatever you think about that. I know we'll have our thoughts on that, but we can control. Manager can control the tactical situation. Let's look at the first half to begin with and what went well in the first half, and we'll start by talking about Chelsea and how they played. So to begin with, Chelsea approached this with two inverting fullbacks, one on the first line of build-up and one on the second line of build-up. So one of those fullbacks is going into midfield to join Moises Caicedo, and one of them is coming inside, narrowing up to be part of a back three with the two centre-backs. They start with Hato on the second line and Gusto on the first line, and then they change that later in the first half after the Gittins injury, and I think they were quite a lot more effective when they changed it. They weren't good, but they were better after the change. Pedro Neto's a part of that as well. In terms of our reactions to the way that they were playing with that sort of 3-2-5 approach, we just followed with our wingers. It was quite a bold way of doing it, I think, because you get situations, probably the most positive situations for Chelsea in the first half, when they get the Enzo Fernandez exits from build-up. And that's really caused by Bowen going in so narrow with Jarrod Hato into the midfield. He's kind of ending up being like a quasi-10 in front of Fernandez and Souček and behind our front two. And that means that when they move the ball to their right-hand side and come back, when they move the ball to the right-hand side, Crescencio Somerville comes out and becomes part of the press, almost in a front three with the two strikers. And when they come back to the other side, Bowen's all the way narrow, so there's no presence on our right flank. Our midfielders had to drift across to the left-hand side of the pitch. They split Cole Palmer and Enzo Fernandez really, really wide, and then it's just too big of a distance, really, for Thomas Souček to make up from screening in front of Liam Delap, very central, all the way out to almost the touchline. Enzo is not going quite that far out, but he's sometimes 5 yards in from the touchline. It's just too big of a sprint, which they can make up in just two passes. The ball moves faster than players can move, so it's too difficult for us to make those distances up. And we start to react better, and as the first half goes on, with Bowen being more responsible for that, so disconnecting from Hato and coming out to Enzo Fernandez. That creates a couple of nice moments for them. I think there's one where Enzo does manage to spin it inside and Bowen's lost Hato, but he's kind of stuck between the double responsibility of the two players, and they're able to generate a moment inside. But really, the reality for most of the first half is we actually press really well. We actually have really good control. They have no way of getting to the final third. They have a lot of very useless possession between the back three, Caicedo and Hato. And consistently, we're able to win the ball in either the middle third or the final third and transition in much more dangerous ways, where the distance to make up to the final third is much less. And it takes one or two passes for us to arrive, touches in the box, generating chances, which is great for us. There's one individual duel, which is dominant would be an understatement. What Wan-Bissaka did to Garnacho in the first half was, if you're Alejandro Garnacho, horrendous, horrible, truly one of the most categorical dominations I've ever seen from a fullback against a winger, both ways. Garnacho was unable to create anything at all. Wan-Bissaka, every tackle, every duel, every time Garnacho faced up to try and get a ball into the box, it was blocked. He was tackled or out for in an aerial duel. And then going the other way, he had the run on him every time. He was able to arrive ahead of him and generate positive situations for us in attack. As we know, he's involved in both goals. A lot of that's to do with Garnacho's, I don't know what he's doing, but his first touches are so closed. So on the other side, when Pedro Neto comes on, they're much more dangerous because he's receiving open. And whilst there's a potential that Juve can then close him down and tackle him and progress up the pitch, often what happens is even if Juve makes the tackle, Neto's able to recover possession after that. Whereas with Garnacho receiving close, Wan-Bissaka can just come up behind him, push him deeper and deeper and deeper. And often what ends up happening is Garnacho just turns the ball over at the end of that, or he has to go back to the centre-back, who then turns the ball over after that. It's been a long time since I've seen us doing this. But pressing with success, right? And being higher up the pitch and being able to transition from more dangerous positions on the pitch. It's the big thing that I think I was saying when we were talking about originally transitioning from David Moyes to a new manager, was saying the idea doesn't necessarily have to be how do we have lots more possession, because we did not have much possession at all in the first half of this game against Chelsea. The big idea perhaps should be more about how can we be more aggressive? How can we have the legs to be more aggressive up the pitch? How can we change the way that our defence is constructed in terms of the individuals so that we can step higher up the pitch and initiate counter-attacks from more dangerous positions, generate more chances with more regularity, rather than having to convert into being a team that's especially ball dominant, has completely different profiles, has to lose a lot of the strengths of the guys that are currently here, enter a bit of a weird period where you're in between and potentially never come out, which is kind of what ended up happening to us. This felt like, for 45 minutes or for 50 minutes, a realization of what should have happened in the first place, where we were very, very, very good. So credit there. That's the first half. Big credit to the players and to the setup and to everything we did in the first half, because it was very, very, very well executed.
Yeah, and I think if people want to take a little bit of positivity from it, it should definitely be in that. Not just because the first half performance was good, but also in terms of looking at how the rest of the season might play out. A 3-2-5 is not uncommon. Yeah. We're going to come up against 3-2-5s a lot, and there are going to be teams that play a 3-2-5 that we come up against who cannot do what Chelsea did in the second half, because they don't have a manager who would make those tactical changes, and because not many teams at all, in fact, I'd probably go so far as to say no team in the league really has the depth of talent that Chelsea has, just by way of hoarding talent, frankly. So they can affect that level of change mid-game. But if we have a first half performance like that against opposition that try and play that way, that can't make those changes, then it might work out differently for us as the season goes on. And obviously just the quality that Chelsea have versus some of those teams playing in 3-2-5 anyway, even from the start of the game, is going to be less than what Chelsea had on the pitch. So I think that's positive to take away. I also think, I know we're going to do individual performance in ET, but just in terms of through a tactical lens, the progression, I know it's only one game and frankly one half, but the fact that Wan-Bissaka is doing that job that well in that setting is good. I think some of the timing issues have been a problem for him previously in terms of timing his pressures. It meant that teams can get down. I know Garnacho made his job a lot easier for him in that half. However, I think you see it on the opposite side of the pitch a lot of the time. I think Diouf is actually quite good at anticipating when a ball's coming. There's often headers that he sort of wins where he meets it in the air and gets there ahead of the ball receiver. If that's something that's been focused on, and they're obviously players that all learn from each other, if Wan-Bissaka continues to improve alongside us being able to play in a slightly more aggressive way, then I think that can only hopefully be good for us as we move forward. So yeah, if people want to take a slither of positivity, then that's definitely it, because I think we probably will see this more, I would imagine, because it feels like something that is repeatable.
Successful defensive approaches against a 3-2-5 have forced most teams to overload with extra bodies and find a way to generate more positive situations in attack and not get stunted in deep build-up and not be able to progress to the final third. Also, you have situations where teams are able to progress to the final third but just don't have enough bodies in the box then to actually score. from the situations they generate in the final third, like Chelsea do in the first half. So even when they get to the final third, they're pinned wide with the wingers. They actually can't access inside particularly well. They end up slinging balls into the box, and there just aren't enough bodies crashing the box to help them generate anything, because they've got the 3 and the 2 deep. So lots of teams, like the team that overload the most against us and have overloaded the most against us for a long period of time now, are Brighton under Hertzler, which we always like look at them and think, this is mad. Why are you sending so many players forward and leaving Dunk on the back line against us? And it hasn't worked particularly well for them against us. We've always found ways to generate something on the break in those situations. Chelsea took a similar approach in the second half. They saw that the 3-2-5 wasn't working for them. They saw that they weren't able to overload with enough bodies. They weren't able to arrive in the final third and dominate in the final third, have possession in the final third anywhere near enough. So many of the big teams have opted to recruit players that actually attack more directly out wide, hold the width, and advance into the final third. And that allows them more creative players, wingers, number 10s, lots of like winger / number 10 profiles like Ryan Shirky to come into more central areas and be effective in the half spaces. They get overloading of lots of bodies in these areas, and it can be really difficult to deal with. It's exactly what Chelsea do in the second half. So instead of having both fullbacks inverting and part of the build-up unit, they change. Cucurella comes on. Malo Gusto, who's good at this anyway, and then eventually Reece James comes on. These guys go high. And instead of having the 3 and the 2, they reduce that to 4 players. So it becomes a 2 and a 2, which regularly ends up really feeling like a 3 and a 1. Enzo Fernandez drops out of being one of the more attacking players, drops onto the second line of build-up with Moises Caicedo. And the situation changes because both fullbacks are now high up the pitch, and also now there are 3 players between the lines centrally. And those 3 players between the lines centrally are serious threats. It's João Pedro, Cole Palmer, and Pedro Neto. These are guys you cannot give space in these situations. Pedro Neto, you might be able to give a little bit because he's probably a little bit better actually as a width holder, not quite so effective in central spaces. And I don't think we see that much from him in the second half. But Palmer and Pedro is a seriously dangerous partnership to have in central spaces. Too good at turning quickly, too good at creating off those moments, either for themselves or for other players. Far too dangerous, basically, to continue to allow those players to have space. We react to that, and as a result, our wingers, instead of being high in the press, go back with the fullbacks, and that completely changes the feel of the game as a result of that. From middle third and final third turnovers to defensive third turnovers. And for them, the question really only ends up becoming, can we overload with more? Can we find quality? They don't actually generate super consistently in terms of big chances. I think in terms of where we are as a team, the rate at which they generate big chances until the very end of the game is not acceptable, but I would say expected, given the quality differential in that period of the match. And then you have to ask yourself, for any football team at 2-2, having led by 2 goals, when the opposition are pushing, and when they then commit 7 bodies to the box, because when Enzo Fernandez scores the winner, there are 7 Chelsea players in the box at the end of the game. They're not playing 3-1-6, they are playing 2-1-7 to finish. How does anyone defend effectively against that sort of thing? And how does that happen is the even bigger question. How can a team feel so confident to allow themselves 2-1-7 when the game is level and they have something to lose? I think that's what
you get when you're aging men, Jack.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the big question we'll ask and try to answer next. So we've talked through the Chelsea changes, what made the second half so much more difficult. But Cal, the big decision that has been heavily criticised and talked about a lot after this game was the one made 67 minutes into it. At 2-1, Nuno decides to take Pablo off and bring Maximilian Kilman on. We know Kilman's been in really terrible form this season. Pablo's been a hugely important player to us since he's come, and he's made a big difference to the way that we're able to attack and defend. Why did he make that choice?
It's a good question, and I think part of the issue is that obviously result bias has informed a lot of that opinion. I think it doesn't go our way, and therefore it looks like an insane decision that's contributed to our downfall, rather. In parts, yeah, I'm sure I can see the arguments. There's clips going around of Kilman making mistakes. I would argue that actually maybe for the goal that everyone is sort of laughing at him for, it's not necessarily him solely to blame. I think Areola can do a lot better. I think Todibo can do a lot better. I think Kilman actually does pretty well to nod it away from Delap, to be honest. But yeah, obviously we ultimately go and lose the game, and it looks like an error from Nuno. But I think when you think about what actually was happening, I understand people wanting to keep Pablo on the pitch, because he is sort of synonymous with the energy that the team have, and then the perceived lack of energy after must be because Pablo's gone, and we were pressing well in the first half, and we take Pablo off, and we can't press well in the second half because he's not there. But if we didn't respond to the changes that Chelsea had made, then we wouldn't have been able to carry on pressing that way anyway. We were getting pinned back, the wingers were pinned back, we didn't have sort of the ability to actually transition in the way that we would have wanted to, or were doing in the first half anyway. Sure, you can if Pablo stays on, you might be able to get the ball to him, but because your wingers are essentially wing backs in what is a back six, who's he holding up the ball to play to in transition apart from himself? He would have to basically do an Antonio shift and run it, and that's not possible. So sure, keeping him on would maybe have allowed to do part of the stuff that was going well in the first half, but all of his supporting cast were being pinned back. So you need to avoid that.
And he's dumped so much energy into the first hour,
by chasing everyone around.
The idea that he's able to continue doing this as well, which is one of the big issues with playing 4-4-2, I have to say. It's working very well for us, but you are killing the strikers out of possession. You are asking for so much from both of them that we're getting into these situations 25 minutes to go, even half an hour to go, where now the energy roll off happens, and without us even changing the guys, without us even taking them off, the feel of the game is already shifting, because that 5-yard sprint has become a 5-yard jog, has become a 5-yard walk, has become I can't do it, and I'm just going to stay here. I'm going to tuck into the midfield, and this time the centre back's going to go straight past me on the outside and cross the ball into the box, and they're going to score. That's what happens. That is the difference. Even when those guys are still on the pitch, it's already changed.
Exactly that. And I think also as well, just like, I know that everyone has their opinions of Max Kilman at the minute, and that's completely understandable because, frankly, for what we paid for him, the form hasn't been there this season. But it's as much about putting players in the positions that they play in, if that makes sense. Like, yes, all of the stuff that happens in the first half falls away because of what Chelsea have done, but also, like, you've got Bowen playing a wing-back shift. He's the player on the pitch that is most likely to score whenever he's on the pitch. So putting him in a position where he's not having to do 90% defending, but actually if we do manage to get out, he is the player that's closest to goal. You make the changes that enable that to happen. Equally, we've just talked about the fact that João Pedro in the half spaces is dangerous. Cole Palmer in the half spaces is dangerous. Bringing on an extra centre-back so that you've got, in theory at least, maybe not so in practice, but in theory, you've got extra coverage in those channels if they are breached. That also sort of makes sense as well. Like, shore it up. If you're going to get pinned back because Chelsea are committing all these players to your backline, you can't just go up to Rosenia and be like, sorry, mate, could you just, like, not commit one player? Could you just, like, go back to 5 so that we can match up? That's not what's going to happen. He's going to keep pushing that. And if he sees that you're not responding, even better, let him he'll commit even more players. So naturally, you do have to sort of think about that. It feels, I guess, regressive in the moment because it feels like you're sort of accepting that they are better than you, but it's kind of the smart thing to do. And I know that there are other options that should be explored, and I'm sure that you've cooked those up and you've got some sort of alternatives. But yeah, I'm not as anti it. Obviously, I'm anti how it plays out, but that's, I think, as much an individual performance thing as it is a tactical one.
I mean, you have to. I think that the big thing for me is you have to look at the reality of the situation. There's a formation on paper and there's a formation on the pitch, right? And in the first half, we're playing a 4-4-2 that in the press can be a 4-3-3 or a 4-2-4. And we're higher up the pitch and we're able to win the ball in the middle and final thirds. In the second half, we start the first 5 minutes really well. But then the adaptations Chelsea make have more and more effect. Cucurella and Gusto being so high has more and more effect. The game becomes more and more difficult for us. And the shape we're playing in reality at the time that change is made is not 4-4-2 or 4-2-4 or 4-3-3. It's 6-2-2. That is the shape we are playing at the time that the change is made. We have a back four, which is being filled out into 6 players because both of our wingers are playing in the back line. We have 2 midfielders and 2 strikers. Our 2 strikers at this time are knackered, so the transition threat is dead. There's no way to get out. We can't keep the ball. We can't get up the pitch. We can't win it high up the pitch. And all that's happening is we are defending our box, and one of the centre-backs or full-backs or wingers now is kicking the ball up the other end of the pitch, and one of the strikers is trying to chase it, not getting there first. The ball is going back to Robert Sanchez. They are reloading and attacking again. That is all that is happening for 5, 10, maybe even 15 minutes prior to the, certainly 10 minutes prior to the change. That is what is going on. So I think whatever you say you have to do, I think the one thing we all need to acknowledge at that stage of the game is that is bad. Something has to change. You are going to have to make some sort of change in that scenario. Otherwise, the 2-1 to 2-2 would have happened anyway, for certain, the way that the game was going at that time. We had to find a way to shift it in some way. What are the options? There are a few. It's not just that you can go to 5 at the back. That's not the only thing you can do. The first one, you could do a high press 4-2-4, go back to what you were doing in the first half and maintain the height of the wingers. So instead of dropping the wingers with the fullbacks, keep the wingers high up the pitch. Now, that could, in theory, force the fullbacks deeper into the build-up unit because they struggled with routes to progress the ball. It also could, in theory, just leave you way too overloaded at the back because they keep their fullbacks high. They play a bit more direct into the front line. And if Delap wins a header or they win a second ball off of a long ball, it's curtains because we just don't have enough players back to be able to deal with the number of players that they have forward. So very risky, extremely hard work physically because there are going to be loads of situations where they do break your high press unit. And then your wingers have to absolutely gun it back to be able to make it back to the fullbacks, which they're probably not going to be able to do anyway. But they're going to end up doing loads of not even shuttle sprinting, half the pitch sprinting, which is going to kill them anyway for energy. And crucially, whatever you do with it, you end up leaving João Pedro free between the lines for the whole game, for the whole rest of the game. He will sit on the side that Liam Delap is on. Liam Delap will pin the centre-back. The centre-back cannot jump to him. Your 2 midfielders are having to jump to their 2 midfielders. There's now a big gap between those guys in the back line, and João Pedro is completely free to receive, turn, and do what João Pedro does there. For me, not a solution that I like at all. We had to change the shape in some way. That enforced some sort of substitution. So that's the first thing. You look at, okay, can we do something with the players we have on the pitch? Not really. There's nothing we can do with the players we have on the pitch to fix this. We're going to have to make a substitution. First substitution you could make would be to bring a midfielder on, to go 4-5-1. That, theoretically, could also force their fullbacks deeper into the build-up unit. It should, in theory, decrease the gaps between the lines for those guys like Palmer, Pedro, and Neto to... Doesn't really work when I say it that way around Palmer, Pedro, and Neto, because his name is Pedro Neto. But you know what I mean. For those guys to operate between the lines. You should also have a 3v3 in there, because you go from 2 midfielders to 3 midfielders. They have the 3 bodies, centrally, trying to operate off of the lap between the lines. The negative... Now you've just got 1 player up front. You leave the striker 1v4 because they have their 2 centre-backs and their 2 midfielders. Your central midfielders end up pinned a little bit deeper to deal with Palmer, Pedro and Neto. And your striker's doing a lot of hopeless chasing. You probably don't win the ball. You probably end up with your wingers deeper anyway because they progress to the final third. And you probably end up playing a 6-3-1. So in reality, what have you achieved? Not very much. You end up feeling pretty much like the same thing is happening. You have 1 less player in attack, 1 more player in midfield, but you still have the wingers on the back line. You still don't really have much of a transition threat. You're still playing in a low block. You're still probably going to concede a goal in the end by doing that. So that kind of rules out the back 4 solutions and forces whatever we do, one of these 4 attackers is going to have to come off, and a centre-back is going to have to come on because we need to go to a back 5 because of the number of bodies they're committing to the last line. They have 6 guys on the last line. With 4, you're always going to be in trouble, right? That is just a very simple equation. So you're saying, whatever we do, we're going to need to change something to make sure we've got at least 5. So we're only -1 rather than -2 on the back line. Obviously, the way we were mitigating that was by having the wingers back, but you're trying to say, this isn't working for us. We're ending up with Somerville Bowen as fullbacks a lot of the time, which feels really bad, and we can't attack successfully. The first back 5 solution I think you would entertain would be a 5-3-2. This would be like a pure out of possession approach. How do we mitigate everything they're doing and make sure that we're much better defensively? It matches up really, really well. It's very difficult for them to progress. It enables pressure on their back two. It matches their middle three between the lines, Palmer, Pedro, Neto. You've got three midfielders in there, so you've got 1v1, 1v1, 1v1. You're not overloaded centrally. The issue with this is it's even more negative than the change we did make, because it means that you're taking not just one of the four attackers off, you're taking two of the four attackers off to bring a centre-back on and a defensive midfielder on. That's a really negative psychological message to send to your players on the pitch when you're leading a game 2-1 and under pressure, and might actually lead to a change in the kind of mental tide that you can't reverse. You also just lack attacking threat. You've got too many defensive players on the pitch. You've got 8 defenders on the pitch and 2 left to attack with. And you also end up asking your wing-backs to do an insane amount of work. They've already worked hard in the first half. They're now, as fullbacks, they've now become wing-backs. And not only do they have to defend 1v1, they also have to get up the other end of the pitch and be the main attackers for us in wide areas, which, you know, we talked about fitness as an issue.
I was just going to say, you probably end up having to make 4 subs, not 2, because you probably go, oh, we're already looking pretty tired.
Yeah.
And this requires a pretty intense shift from both wing-backs. So maybe we take all 4 players off, which again, you're already having a detrimental mental impact by going so defensive. If you then hook 4 players,
exactly,
it's kind of like, lads, yeah, it's not looking good.
So it's probably too many steps to get to the pure defend the box, defend this situation, and make sure that we have a way of locking it out.
You're also fully committed then as well, right? If you've used
there's no
4
reverse,
of your subs,
there's no way to reverse.
We can't play our way back out of this because there's no, as you say, there's no reverse.
And also you lose the 2 more natural wing back options, right? You go from Wan-Bissaka and Juve, who you'd love in these situations, but who are going to get gassed with maybe another 10 minutes of game time, and you end up with Walker, Peter, and Scholes, good players, much better as fullbacks than as wing backs at the moment for us, based on what we've seen this season. That takes you to 5-2-3 or 5-4-1, whichever way you look at it. Now, there's a big distinction between those things, which we're going to come on to in a second. What does that do positively? The big first thing is Jarrod Bowen and Crescencio Somerville no longer need to be defenders. They should be released higher up the pitch. It should recapture your counter-attacking threat, enable you to be more threatening on the break. It gives you +1 on Chelsea's central attacking players. You have the 2 midfielders and the 3 centre-backs. That's 5. They have the 3 guys between the lines and the lap. That's 4. So you've got an extra player in there. Your 2 wide players, if they come inside the pitch, should give you cover shadows against the 2 wide attacking players for them, which I think the way they were playing it was Neto and Palmer from memory, and you should be able to block out access to those players by covering them with Bowen and Somerville. They're not marking them, but they're stopping the ball from being able to go directly into them from Caicedo, Fernandes, Fofana or Chalobah. The negatives, which... obviously, we did this, right? Which we'll see. The negatives, very hard system to master. It's not an easy thing to do well. Your triggers have to be very good. Your timing has to be very good. We see Palace have done this very well under Glasner. We saw Man United attempt to do not the same thing, but a similar sort of thing under Amorim. If it goes wrong, it goes wrong, and it can go wrong spectacularly. If it goes right, it can go right, and it can go right spectacularly. But there's quite a big variance between those things. And as timing goes wrong in this system, it can feel very bad. You can end up defending very, very, very deep, and it can be, instead of a 5-2-3, it can be a 5-4-1, and instead of a 5-4-1, it can even be a 7-2-1. And the more it becomes a 5-4-1 or even a 7-2-1, you then have to defend the box very, 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 very well. Slight issue for West Ham this season. Slight issue for West Ham this season.
Also hampered by the fact that both your central midfielders have got to play the full 90 as well. In this game, in the context, right? They've got so much responsibility to cover the channels, and Souček, bless him, is doing it on, what are jelly legs at that point.
Yeah, on paper, it's the best solution, though. It's the thing that you do in this kind of match scenario to protect the lead and carry a threat and attack. All of the other solutions have some sort of issue. They either don't defend particularly well, they're either too risky, or they don't carry enough threat going forward. A 5-2-3 protects your last line, covers your central overloads, retains some attacking threat, and is actually physically easier for the players. You're not asking for some sort of terror shift from a wing back or from a striker or from anything. You can sit and screen a bit more effectively. It should be a little bit easier to see the game out without running out of energy. Cal, whistle stop tour. Can you explain why, despite it being the sensible solution on paper, and probably that's the reason why Nuno did it, why it didn't work out for us?
Yeah. Well, it is execution, really, isn't it? And I think sort of both on individual, but also maybe some slight tactical tweaks from the manager would have helped as well.
Yeah,
exactly. I think ultimately you've kind of already alluded to it. It's very easy for this system to go from a 5-2-3 to a 5-4-1. And I think that happens to us pretty quickly, in part because I think we've got players on there that are tiring. You've also got Chelsea that are willing to just throw more and more at it, which means that we do get pinned back deeper. I think another part that we discussed was around sort of when you do end up in the position to be able to transition, like a key part of the success of any counter-attacking unit is proximity to one another. And I think in those moments when they did come, the gaps between what should be a 3 were too sort of disjointed, essentially. Like you could hit one man, but then it felt like a one-man army when really it should have felt like, I kind of always think of it in a 5-2-3 as a bit of an arrowhead. It's like you want the one guy, but you kind of need the 2 points of the arrow to be either side of him, and you go forward in that sort of...
Yeah, it's the 2 points either side of him, and then you ask the wing-backs to make up the last part of the attack, right? We see Munoz do this so well for Crystal Palace. I know they've not been good recently, but he's like the perfect example of like you make up that distance and you arrive to shoot or cut it back for someone, and you maybe pick up a few goals playing that way as a wing-back in that system.
I think many moons ago was the same example, right? Under the same manager, actually, I guess.
Whereas if you play it like we did, where the wingers are quite wide, you end up too disconnected. You can't combine with each other, and also your wing backs don't end up arriving either because your wingers are the players in the wide areas. So the critical first thing is that instead of it being a 5-2-3, we played it as a 5-4-1.
Yeah.
The critical follow-on step from that is that when 5-4-1 doesn't feel good defensively, and when you're worried, and when you're anxious, and when you're defending a lead and you're down there, it can become 7-2-1. This is what happened for us. It's the whole theoretical idea of getting the wingers out of the back line didn't happen.
Yeah.
And the wingers stayed in the back line.
Yeah, precisely that. And I think my preference, and this is where I come to it being sort of about a tactical thing as much as it is about execution, is that it sounds a bit nuts in hindsight because of how much pressure we were under, but we sort of just needed to be a bit more aggressive and back ourselves a bit more, I think. Ultimately, you have to back yourself in that 1v1 with Delap, which is difficult because I guess Nuno doesn't have much confidence in any of the centre-back options at the minute, and frankly, on form, I'm not sure I would either, but you still have to take that gamble. These are still Premier League centre-backs at the end of the day, and if you want to stay in the game, this is the right thing to do. What actually happens is that the centre-backs are too narrow, whereas the two wide centre-backs should be committing pretty aggressively onto those attacking midfielders in the half spaces, which, if you do commit to that, would then allow our wing-backs to be the players that match up with their wide forwards. But actually, what happens instead is that we end up pinned back. The centre-backs are not really aggressive enough, which means the wing-backs then tuck inside, and then it forces the wingers to come all the way back and cover the players that the wing-backs would ideally be covering anyway. And that's how you end up with that 7-back system, which is just no good. And also then means you can't transition anyway because all of those players are back and you just don't have any outball. You don't have any outball, so then you end up defending another wave of attacks, and then you get pinned even more deeper. Terrible English from me today. Even deeper would have been fine. But yeah, and it's just that attritional sort of stuff. It allows, as we get more, more pinned. I didn't say back. As we get more pinned, Rosenia can then commit more bodies forward, and it's just, you see it. That's how it ends, right? Enzo is eventually released to go and crash the box.
Yeah.
Having played a slightly deeper role at the start of the second half to allow the wing-backs to be more advanced. Finally, it's just like, no, everyone go for it. We're deep, and it relies so much on our ability to be able to defend our box. And that's ultimately where my sort of hang up with it all is. I agree with you that this is the right adaptation from a numbers written on a piece of paper and the tactics that match up with what they're doing. but I just have so little confidence, and there is an increasing body of evidence to suggest that our ability to defend our box, both from centre-backs, from tired midfielders, from a goalkeeper who's not aggressive enough off their line to help the centre-backs out, it's such a difficult position for us to be in, because yes, in principle, it is exactly the right approach to match up against this. Do we execute it in the right way? No. Are we aggressive enough? No. Does aggression come from confidence? Yes. Do we have confidence? No. So it's just a rubbish position to be in, really, because it makes sense, but it just doesn't feel like we have the cast of characters at the minute, from a profiling point of view, from a confidence point of view, to ever be able to pull this off for a length of time, unfortunately. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe a bit more aggression. Hopefully we learn from this. I imagine that, given what we've seen between Nuno and Paco Gémez clashing, I would imagine that Gémez maybe would have wanted us to be slightly more aggressive in those moments. Maybe that's not happened. Maybe they go and watch the tape and go, actually, this is what should have happened, and we learn from it as we go into the season, and we can defend in these scenarios a little bit better. But yeah, it was an idea that just didn't work out, and actually ended up being more negative than what we were trying to get away from in the first instance. As you say, we tried to make a tweak to get away from having 6 people in the back line, and instead ended up with 7. So yeah, not quite what we'd have planned, I don't think.
Yeah, I think goal 2 is really the example, isn't it? That sums
Great
up
film as well.
How it, yeah, fantastic film. That sums up the consequences of what we did, right? Because what should have happened is it should have been Wan-Bissaka closing down the cross, which I think is Neto that crosses the ball into the box. It should be Juve at the back post contesting the aerial against Gusto. And then we should have our 3 centre-backs fighting for what drops in the box. But instead of that, the eagle-eyed amongst you will have noticed that it was Bowen closing down the cross, Crescencio Somerville defending the back post against Gusto, yet still the 3 centre-backs contesting for the ball dropping in the box. This is an example of being too man-to-man in the way that you orient it. It's actually not about being too negative. For me, it's easy to categorise this as too negative an approach, but actually what happened is that Juve stayed locked to Palmer, and Wan-Bissaka actually in this scenario switches over to Cucurella because of Cucurella's early run, which is a little bit more complicated, but it's about the run that Cucurella is making in that game, which he's often doing, which Carl already spoke about as something that Brasilia gets from him as a bit of a Swiss Army knife into the sort of number 10 space. On the other side of the pitch, we just need to disconnect in that moment, right? Somerville can take responsibility for Palmer, who's coming in towards the edge of the box, and Juve can take responsibility for the back post header. The difference there, first half, Wan-Bissaka's blocking those crosses from Garnacho, and Juve or Wan-Bissaka is nodding them out, heading them over the player that's contesting at the back post, and they're going out for corners. You change the players to Bowen and Somerville, and it's a goal. That's what's happened, and that's the thing we need to learn from. It's not that we're doing the wrong thing tactically to react in these situations. It's that across the group, and perhaps also tactically in terms of how we then execute the ideas, there isn't enough confidence to be able to allow someone to take more responsibility individually in those key moments, and we end up packed as a unit, and that in theory should help us, but sometimes it actually makes things more difficult. So big lessons to learn from it. Lots of positives to take from the first half. Lots of positives to take from, like I said, the way that we reacted at 2-2. But a tough one, a really tough one, as I'm sure everyone listening to this will feel. We're going to talk about the individual performances now on ET, and we'll also talk about maybe how Disasi can help in some of these situations, and hopefully we'll see you over there. Well done for those of you that are still here for getting through a big tactics, really, really big chunky tactics section. If you want to see it on the board, if you want to help, some of this stuff is difficult to bring to life on a podcast, then Patreon Q&A, we'll be doing a live Q&A this week. I think it's tomorrow, or as this comes out, it'll be today, this evening. And we'll crack the tactics board out on there and look at exactly how some of this minutiae plays out, and what things we need to do differently in the future to be more successful in these moments. we have to find a way to be able to defend better in these situations. Otherwise, our positive work is not going to help us win the points that we need to win in order to catch the teams above us. It's closer though, and I think if there's anything that we should be taking away from this game, same as the games before, it's closer. We're closer. Even if the result wasn't there this time, we're much closer. All right. See you on ET. If not, see you next week.